Welcome back. So we're talking about Supine Hero. And again, a really great front body opener. Definitely a pose you need to do some prep for, which we'll talk about at the end of the video. But I'm going to show you today with Lainey some very specific variations to ease your students into this posture. So when coming into a pose like Supine Virasana or Supta Virasana, it's really important to make sure you give your students as many variations as possible, because you will find the extremes in a class, or for yourself as a student, you may be all over the spectrum depending on what your body has gone through as to the needs of such a pose. And I always take the mentality with this pose, it often takes the whole class to really get them prepped for this posture. So come the end of the class, I'm going to have them in this posture for several rounds of breath, or maybe coming into it a few different times. And then by that last time, they have the confidence to know what they need to do so they can actually enjoy the posture. So please don't take this pose lightly, and please just don't throw yourself or your students into this posture, as they may not be as mobile as you are and may need a little bit more TLC. So we're going to talk about that TLC right now. All right, so Lainey's in supine, or in simple hero's pose, and she's going to wiggle herself down to sit between her heels because that's her comfort level. Now let's say that you're someone that is not able to comfortably sit on the floor flat. So remember the heroes video that you just watched. This is where, and Lainey's not going to do it, she doesn't have to, but this is where you'd sit on your block, or you'd sit on your beanbag, or you'd sit on your blanket. So using that, when we set up the bolster here in a second, you're not going to sit on what you're laying back on. You're going to have a separate prop for that. So Lainey's on the floor, which is great. I'm going to set up the bolster behind her. Now, working in a class, I often demo how to set up the bolster support first, so then they can do it themselves, and then I'll often come around if they need additional help. So the bolster is up tight to her sacrum. You have a mid-level block at about the middle of the bolster, and then a high-level block at the edge of the bolster. So you're supporting the middle of the back and the head. So now when Lainey's ready, she's going to slowly lay back, and she may need her hands for help to come back. Again, Lainey's fairly open in the front body. It's not such an issue, but some other people might need to slowly inch themselves back. Now, recognizing if you find that when you sit back, there's a sharp pain in the lower back, on the way back, using your hands, so if Lainey kind of comes up halfway or so, on your way back, using your hands, you can essentially kind of lift the hips and tuck the pelvis. So your tailbone is pointing towards the knees. So when you come back, now there's length in the lower back. And it's also going to turn up the dial on the stretch through the quadriceps as well. So just recognize it's kind of a 2-for-1. As you lay back, as a teacher, I'm looking at my students to kind of notice the level of comfort or discomfort they have. If Lainey was supporting herself with her hands, trying not to lay back because it's so tense, that's a red flag for me that she may need additional support. Now, maybe she needs a cushion behind her back, or maybe she just needs a cushion or a blanket to support her head because that tension moving up her body is still quite high. So now she's much more in line, she feels more comfortable, she may need additional props. Please never underestimate that. I have students that need a beanbag behind the back in addition to the bolster, another 2 beanbags for the head, and they're sitting on something quite high. But again, props allow you to be successful in the pose and feel what the pose is supposed to help you feel. Let's not shove our bodies into something we don't yet fit into, and we may never fit into, and that's okay. So I'm going to remove this because Lainey doesn't necessarily need that. So let's say Lainey and the class has been in this posture for about a minute, and Lainey's feeling pretty good. She's actually warming up quite quickly. We can start to lower the degree of the bolster as she starts to feel more comfortable. So I'm going to let go of the middle block and just put a block up by the head. So now when she lays back, it's a little bit of a lower incline, kind of more floor-like, but she still has the gentle support for her mid-back and for her head and shoulders. She's definitely going to notice an increased stretch here, and again, any sort of jamming sensation in the lower back, lifting the hips, and kind of turning the tailbone and pubis bone towards the kneecaps, it's going to accentuate the stretch through the quads. Now, as you lower down, or as you just pick a height, if you notice the knees are free-floating up, angling towards the ceiling, that's a sign for me as a teacher and for you watching this video to say, I have to lift the other end of the boat up just a little bit more. Because we don't need all that tension floating in the knee joint. Just create a nice anchoring down through the knee. As far as the legs go, are you okay there? Okay, as far as the legs go, it really is two schools of thought. Now some will say try to keep the legs parallel and even with each other, while others will be more loose about it and say kind of let the legs go wherever they go. My saying is let's try to find neutral first, and then you can kind of play with the legs. But if they automatically spring out, more than likely the tightness through the outer line of the leg or the outer line of the quad is probably pulling them out. So if we're trying to kind of work into what's restricted, wouldn't it make sense then to try to maybe kind of go against that? So just some food for thought, but ultimately this is your body and you need to pay attention to it. Remember, if necessary, propping the ankles. Remember, if necessary, sliding the strap behind the knee. Okay, so let's say now Lainey comes back up and she's going to progress a little bit further. There's a couple options here. So before Lainey lays back, option one is to just have the bolster flat and right up against her sacrum. It's going to offer a little bit more of a lordotic curve now, which changes that stretch, and that's great, and a little bit lower profile. She can also turn the bolster like a cross of a T, so when Lainey lays back, it's kind of at either the lower back or the chest, maybe a little high. Let's have her come up one more time. So that when she lays back now, arms can come right alongside the ears. She has this great kind of arcing sensation. There should be no strain in the neck. If you saw the first time we went back, it was a little bit high. So you could definitely see the strain in her neck. She may need a prop under her head. So she could use a blanket or a bolster. If her neck and head were floating, maybe she has a shorter neck. Lainey has a quite long torso, so she doesn't necessarily need that. I love this variation for chest opening and for thoracic release, especially for so many of us here we on our cell phones, kind of clamped forward. This is also really great for depression and anxiety. That being said, you may also notice yourself moving through a wave of emotions with those as you work to open the body. If you're working with this variation, I want to encourage you to keep the arms alongside the ears or at least at T palms up, because I want this openness through the shoulder and the pectoral versus the shoulders rolling forward if they were to be kept down at their sides. Now to come out of this, kind of bringing your hands down to your sides and pressing yourself up, not to strain the neck, to come up, okay? So let's say you're not using a bolster and you don't have any other props available. You can, I'm not going to have Lainey lay back quite yet. You could build your own bolster, so low block, mid block, and then placing a blanket over them with a cushion for support for the head. So that's one way you can do that. But let's say that Lainey doesn't need really anything at all. She could, have a block behind her supporting her thoracic or lower back, or two, again, this is going to be for maybe a small few, no support at all. So as Lainey works her way back, again, you can see she's tipping her pelvis to open the front of the body. And as she comes down, she's looking to be able to relax her rib cage and really extend out through the knees. This is a big patella tendon stretch. This is a big quad attachment stretch. And she may feel this all the way up into her psoas. You should not feel abrupt stretching in your lower back. If you do, you either need a support and you need to come up, or you need to kind of adjust the tilt of the pelvis. She could then finally extend her arms all the way up overhead and just create one long line of extension. Now, be that said, I don't want you sitting in this posture where you feel like, oh my gosh, my legs are going numb, oh my goodness, like, my lower back is killing me. That's a sign that something's not right. So that's why you're using all of these available props and supports, and most importantly, you're moving slow and mindfully. All right, so to come up, Lainey's going to bring her hands by her sides and kind of use her elbows to press herself up and slowly come back up. Awesome. Are you doing okay so far? Okay, so let's say you have no props at all. What do? So Lainey's going to bring her hands right back behind her and come onto her palms. Give a little bend in the elbows. And before she comes onto her forearms, she's just going to lift the heart and create a little bit of almost like a back bend or an extension. And a very basic, like, I'm thinking about coming back, Supta Virasana. Variation 2, she can come to her forearms. And her fingers might even tuck a little bit underneath her bum or hold onto her feet. And then the same thing again, she's going to lift the heart. Chin is either tucked or gently dropping back. There should be no strain on the neck. So this would be kind of like a mid-grade, and then obviously what we did before was on the floor to To come up, you're going to come right up off your forearms. And then I would say counterpose this with a forward bend or a downward facing dog. Lainey, you can choose whatever you need to counterpose that. And as Lainey releases that, I just want to think about here now, as I said in the beginning, some prep poses for a pose like Supta Virasana. So again, like Hero's pose, poses like functional extension, deep lunge, even poses like pigeon or half spinal twist, even just a standing twist, cat-cow, high lunge. One of my favorite preps for Hero is going to be half cow or half camel, on the wall, really opening up the quads. And it's going to ultimately help you feel more successful in the posture and enjoy the posture so much more. All right, until next time, great job.